Our first presentation will be given by Consuelo Hernandez. Consuelo will be talking about girdling an avocado tree. Consuelo is an agronomist engineer. She studied at the Catholic University in Valparaiso in Chile. Consuelo worked both for Westphalia and Broca Nurseries as an international coordinator in Chile. Consuelo is now located in Santa Paula and is the international director for Broca Nursery.
Good morning, everyone. So, as Keith already said, we're here to talk about girdling in avocados. Samuel and I put together a short presentation. We tried to make it as simple as possible and also as practical as possible. So some of the subjects that we're going to discuss today are what is girdling, the physiology of girdling, the application in avocado, why do we do it and when do we do it, and then Samuel will jump in and he will talk about how do we do it, how do we choose which trees to girdle, how do we choose which branches to girdle, how do we know whether we have girdled correctly, and then to finish, I'll come back and say, discuss a bit about the advantages and disadvantages of girdling. So what is girdling? Girdling is a variety of methods used to stop or reduce the flow of sap via the bark or phloem to the lower parts of the tree and the roots. There are different terms used to describe this method. One of them is girdling, the other one is sintering. Some people make a difference between the width of the cut or the depth of the cut, but for this presentation, we will just be referring to it as girdling. So just for you to keep in mind, what we will be talking during the presentation is what we see in this photograph here. That is a thin cut that will recover after 1 or 2 months. What we won't be referring to is to this cut over here. This is not an avocado tree, but here you can see that the cut made was really wide, and that is usually done in order to kill the trees. So, of course, you don't want to do that. Girdles are performed in agriculture in different species they have been performed for years. And the reason why people make girdlings, it's because they have an effect on the timing of flowering and fruiting. They can have an effect on the fruit size. They can have an effect on yields. And as I already mentioned to you, they are also used to kill unwanted trees. So just going through basic physiology of what's going on in the tree when we girdle. Here we have a diagram with an overview of the transport in the trees. So very easy. We start with the roots that absorb water and dissolve minerals from the soil. After that, the water and minerals are transported upward from the roots to the shoots as xylem sap. Then the sugars are produced by photosynthesis in the leaves. Those sugars are transported as phloem sap to the roots and other parts of the plant. So we have the xylem going up and the phloem going down. So the xylem is taking a mass, it's the pathway that takes a mass flow of water and mineral salts up by transpiration. And the phloem is the pathway that takes sugars made in the leaf cells by photosynthesis downwards, creating a concentrated sugar solution. What we want to do when we girdle is we want to cut the flow of the phloem, and this will cause an interruption of phloem transport of photoassimilates or carbohydrates between the girdled trunk or limb to the other parts of the tree, essentially between the canopy and roots. for you to get like an idea of what we want to do when we girdle, here we have a trunk internal structure. This is not an avocado, but it works the same. So in the internal part of the trunk, we have the hardwood or old xylem. Here we have the cambium, that's a thin line. And inside the cambium, we have the xylem. So our pathway is taking sap up. And outside the cambium, we have the phloem and the bark. So what we want to do when we girdle is to cut the outer bark and the phloem, so then we cut the flow of carbohydrates down the tree. So why do we do it in avocados? Today we're going to discuss why we do it at Broco Ranches. That's also the main reason why people do it in Chile. And the reason why we do it is to ensure a good flowering and good fruiting in healthy avocado trees. So what we want to do is to temporarily swing the vegetative reproductive balance away from vegetative and into reproductive growth. So the way we do it is because we cut the flow of the carbohydrates. So now we're keeping all of the carbohydrates up in the top part of the tree. And when we want to turn buds that are vegetative into reproductive, these pass from vegetative to reproductive will be enhanced by the presence of carbohydrates in the top part of the tree, because the carbohydrates will favor the flower induction and flower differentiation. So after we have here a photo of what we would see in a branch that hasn't been girdled and one that has been girdled. So here you can see that the buds are those thin elongated buds that are the vegetative buds, and on this other photo we have those thick juicy buds that are the reproductive ones. So when we girdle, we expect to see mainly this kind of buds in the branches. The timing of when we do it, it will depend where you're located. We at Broco Ranches do it in October. In California, we think the timing could be between the 15th of September to the 15th of November. So because I explained before that the reason why we do this is to have more carbohydrates available when the flower induction and flower differentiation takes place. The season when we want to do it will depend on the phenology of the avocados in your area. So as you can see in this slide, girdling has many disadvantages, actually more disadvantages than advantages. But the advantages weigh more than the disadvantages. So some of the advantages that have the girdling is that you can get less alternate bearing. The reason for this is that because if you know that this coming year you will have a low amount of flowers because you're coming into an off year, you can girdle your branches in order to have more flowers. This will also cause or have as a consequence higher yields. Another advantage is that many people use that girdling as a practice that you do whenever you want to remove branches. So if you know that you're going to remove a branch, you can go this year, girdle it, and try to get the last big production out of it before you kill it. Some of the disadvantages of the girdling is that you need a lot of training and skills. So as Samuel showed you in his photos, Samuel and one of the workers that work with him go before the crew comes in, and they have to mark each single branch that they want to be girdled. So They are the ones looking at the trees, selecting which branches are going to be girdled, and every year they mark with a different color of paint. So for example, you saw some white paints, that those are the rings that the crew needs to make this year. So last year they went with red paint and they marked all of the branches with red paint, and those are the ones the crew had to do last year. It's labor intensive, of course. It can reduce fruit size while increasing yields, because you have too many fruit, you can have competition, and then the fruit will get smaller. There is a risk of limb breakage if you overload your branch, and that's usually when you don't do it correctly. You overdo it, or you didn't select the right branches to girdle. There's also a potential risk of sunburn due to poor regrowth. Also, when you didn't select the right branches, or you did it too deep. So that is something you'll see if you didn't girdle correctly. There is damage to the roots, because as I showed you in the transport overview diagram, you will be cutting the flow of carbohydrates to the roots. So the roots will starve a bit, but because you never girdle 100% of the branch, and how of the tree, and how Samuel already explained, you need to leave nurse limbs. Those nurse limbs are going to continue providing carbohydrates to the roots. So the roots won't die, but they will starve a bit. So you will cause a stress on the tree. Also, if you overdo it, you will get higher alternation, because you will have too much fruit in one year and it won't be able to recover for the following year. So to finalize the talk, we're going to go through some important notes that are important for you to keep in mind. So this is as much art as science. You cannot go and just try to follow some rules and say, okay, the whole farm needs to be girdled 50% to 70% of the trees. You have to go out there, you have to look at your tree, you need to use your own criteria and experience. Girdling, extreme care should be taken so that only the prescribed strip of bark is removed. As Sam already showed you, if you go too shallow, you won't cut the flow of carbohydrates, so you won't get any results. If you go too deep, you might even cut the xylem, so you will be cutting the flow of water and minerals up that branch, and that branch will get too stressed. The proper timing optimizes the girdling response. If you want to get more flowers, of course, if you don't do it during the flower initiation or flower differentiation stage, you won't cause any effect on the tree. Do not girdle stress trees, because girdling place trees under stress. The reason for that is what I explained you about the root system that will be starving a bit. So we would never girdle a stress tree. If you have salinity conditions in your orchard, or you're affected by the drought, your roots are already going to be suffering. So if you put a girdle, you will make them suffer even more, and you can actually end up killing your trees. So be very careful with stress trees. You need to treat each tree as an individual. Of course, you cannot go and use as a rule to girdle 3 branches of all of the trees. You need to see how your trees are doing, how they are behaving. That maybe you have one stress tree next to another that's vigorous and healthy. So you have to go out there and look. We use this as only one aspect of an overall orchard management, because this is also related to the health of your tree. We have a high density orchard where we perform our girdlings, and this is working very good for us because we also irrigate them correctly and we fertilize them a lot. So that's why you need to keep in mind that if you're going to do it, you need to have enough water and to be on top of the fertilizer system, so you won't starve your trees. do it correctly, or the effort is wasted and this is an expensive effort. You also need to keep in mind that you need to disinfect your tools whenever you go from one tree to the other. In California, we have sun blotch viroid, and in order not to infect your whole orchard, it's very important that you disinfect the tools between one tree and the other. We also need to keep in mind that we need strong trees, and one way of getting strong trees is selecting the right rootstocks. Most of the clonal rootstocks that we are using in California are quite vigorous, so I think that should be fine. And you also need to keep in mind that all of the instructions that we have been giving now today are made for Hass. So if you have a gem tree or a lamb Hass or a Carmen tree, those trees tend to flower a lot by nature. You don't need to make anything to make them flower even more. Because if you girdle a gem tree, we've done it, you can end up like killing it or almost killing it because it will be too many flowers. Also, you can practice girdling on your pollinizers because, of course, you want more flowers from those trees. So that would be something that maybe you should also try.